Hey guys, welcome back. So today I'm out here with my friend David Fortier. Hi David, how you doing?
Very well, very glad to be here.
And what we have in front of us is an SVD rifle. Now this rifle belongs to a mutual friend of ours, Marc Vorobiev, who brought out this afternoon. We've had the pleasure of shooting the rifle this afternoon and you know, basically getting acquainted with it. Now David has a lot of experience with this rifle. David is kind of a warehouse of information. He knows a lot about the technical information of this rifle, a lot of stuff that I don't know myself. And so David, can you tell us about this rifle? What was the impetus behind the rifle? What were the Russians thinking when they developed this rifle? And what rifle did it replace in service when it came about?
Well, what's interesting is the Germans were, you know, the home of modern sniping during World War I. But in the interwar period, they basically left it behind and forgot about it. The Russians, though, they learned a hard lesson during the First World War when they simply had no capability to counter German snipers. And they systematically started the training of snipers and the development of modern sniping equipment in the 1920s and 1930s. It led to the development of Mosin-Nagant sniper rifle series, as well as the SVT-40 series. And in the post-war era, they took all the lessons learned on the Eastern Front during World War II and they incorporated them into a design which became the SVD Dragunov.
And so this replaced the PU sniper rifle in service?
It replaced the Mosin PU as well as the SVT-40s.
And about what time was that? What year?
Basically, they started development in the late 1950s on this. Dragunov started work on this rifle in 1958. They went through a competition with a variety of different sniper rifles designs before he won the competition, and it was adopted in 1963.
1963. So it's also interesting to note that the PU sniper rifle was in service until 1963, well after the war.
They actually remained in Soviet service beyond that because it took a while for the SVDs to be put into mass production and actually filter out into units.
Now the Russians weren't the first to adopt a semi-automatic sniper rifle, obviously. I mean, I know the US had the M1D Garand in World War II. So they were a little bit behind the times, but they really kind of jumped forward with this rifle, right?
Absolutely. This was something that had never been done before, and that was one of the things that makes this such an interesting design, in that prior to the introduction of the SVD Dragunov, sniper rifles were nothing more than combat rifles that had optics mounted on them. Some of them worked well, some of them really didn't work well. I mean, countries cobbled together rifles sometimes, and then on the other hand you had England, who had Holland build their number 4T. So this was different. This was a design built from the ground up to be a sniper rifle.
And the designer was a successful rifle designer of match grade, Olympic grade rifles, correct? And so he rolled over.
Yeah, it was unique in that basically Dragunov, he wasn't a military arms designer like, say, Kalashnikov was. Okay, Kalashnikov became famous for his military designs. Dragunov was famous for his competition rifles, extremely accurate biathlon rifles. His rifles won Olympic gold competing against literally the best guns in the world. So he was very, very well known in Russia for competition rifles. This was his military design, and this is what he's actually famous for in the West.
That's very interesting. And so this rifle, now we were having a discussion before we were shooting the video, and we were talking about the scope of the rifle. And you said something I really didn't know, that this was really one of the most advanced scopes of the era. And you were telling me about the early versions of the scope having infrared capabilities. Can you explain a little bit about what that is?
Okay, basically when the Russians developed this rifle, they didn't just develop a rifle, they developed an entire system. This incorporated the rifle itself, the ammunition for it, as well as the optic. And the optic in 1963, when this rifle was introduced, was virtually the state of the art and was far beyond anything that any other country was fielding. What's interesting about it is, like what you said, it had the ability to detect active infrared light sources. You basically had a little switch here, you'd throw it, and a lever would drop a screen down into your field of view. Now at nighttime you can't see through your scope anyways, and you wouldn't be able to see through your field of view with the screen down. But when a sniper scanned terrain, he would be able to see an infrared light source. It would appear as a green blob in his field of view. Now the scope also has a illuminated reticle, which was very innovative. Okay, and this would allow him, with his reticle illuminated, to spot an active infrared light source and actively engage it.
That's amazing. Now they took that feature off at some time afterwards.
In the 1980s, it was, you know, active infrared light sources were going out of vogue, so they deleted it. But it was still a very interesting feature. But the scope had a number of them. It's like the illuminated reticle. Carl Zeiss developed illuminated reticles in the 1920, well, actually 1922, okay? But you never really saw them. Personally, it's my opinion that there was a large number of German engineers that ended up in Russia post-war, and I would say that there are a number of German optical engineers, probably from Carl Zeiss Jena, who were involved in the development of this optic, because it has a number of revolutionary features.
Now, another thing, when people see this rifle, they automatically think AK. It's just a big AK that fires a 7.62 by 54R, and nothing could be further from the truth. While it has the outward appearances of an AK, I think perhaps the designer was trying to keep the functionality of the rifle similar to the battle rifle today, right? I mean, it has similar controls. However, internally, this is a completely different rifle. This thing is built for accuracy. Can you tell us a little bit about what sets this rifle apart? What makes it so accurate? Everything from the bolt to the gas system. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Now, keep in mind, this isn't a precision rifle. It's not what you consider a half MOA, heavy barrel bolt gun. Okay, this was made for shooting people. Okay. Now that said, the accuracy on it is very good for a semi-automatic sniper system, especially from this time period. And one of the things that Dragunov did was he had a set of criteria that he had to design the rifle to. It needed to be accurate, but it also needed to be lightweight, okay, and it needed to be highly mobile. The sniper had to be able to actually fight with the rifle, so he had to go through all these different things. He stated, if I'd had wanted to, I could have made the rifle much more accurate, but I could never have met the weight requirement. Okay, so what he did was he designed a 3-lug rotating bolt. Now, this is a little bit different than the AK's 2-lug bolt. And if you take it out and if you actually compare it to, say, a TRG-22 from Sako, they're very similar in their profile. So you have a 3-lug rotating bolt which locks up all the way around the chamber, okay? The barrel is not free-floated, but it's what I would refer to as semi-free floated, where these handguards, these split handguards, they're spring-loaded here, so they can actually move and give with the barrel. The barrel's not hard locked into them, okay? And then over time, they actually evolved the rifling on it. It was originally a 1 and 12.6-inch twist, specifically set up for their sniper load, and then around 1973 or so, they switched to a traditional 1 and 9.4-inch twist to allow a variety of armor-piercing and tracers and different infantry-type ammunition to be shot through it. So, everything was done on the rifle to try to enhance the accuracy while keeping the weight. It's built on a machine steel receiver, unlike an AKM with a stamped receiver, and the trigger was specifically tuned to provide a very crisp let-off. It has a 3-pound weight from the factory, was what they were designed for. And I've heard some people disparage, an SVD trigger. Well, actually, the SVD trigger is very well designed. And I had a conversation once with Mark Krebs from Krebs Custom. And he said at an armorer's level, this is a very easy to work trigger to put a superb pull on.
Now, what's the magnification on the scope?
The scope is a straight 4X. It has a 24mm objective, okay? What that does is it gives you a 6mm exit pupil, okay? Now, when you're 18, 19 years old, your eye will dilate to about maybe 6, possibly 6.5 millimeters. When you're our age, okay, your eye will probably only dilate to maybe 5.5 millimeter. So you're getting basically as much light transmission as an optic of this type was able to give you. So the image is fairly bright.
Now, with the 4-power magnification, what range could a Soviet sniper or Russian sniper expect to reach out and effectively engage a man-sized target?
Well, 4X, as you can see with today's ACOG, 4X is a very, very flexible magnification. It's a very good general purpose magnification. The downside to it is it's very hard to identify targets at distance. It's very easy to lay on a known distance range and shoot a white silhouette at 600 meters, but a camouflage target, from someone that doesn't want to be seen, it's much harder to identify and, actually zoom in on someone like that. So you can shoot a 4X optic if you can see the target distinctly out to, 600, 700, 800 yards or beyond that. The problem, though, is in a military situation, actually locating a target.
Now, Marco, the guy that owns the rifle, in Afghanistan, he actually engaged a target at over 1,000 meters.
Yeah,
and that was because the target was silhouetted against the background.
Well, it was also a 12.7 machine gun that was actively engaging him, and so he had kind of
an incentive.
An incentive to do it, and he, again, you know, he eliminated that threat. But I would say that the weak point of this scope for long range, what we would consider traditional sniping use, would be the optics magnification. Now, on the flip side of that, okay, if you're talking about inside 600 meters, which is where 80% of all the sniper shots were taken in World War II, okay, then it's actually kind of a plus because you have a wide field of view, you don't have as much movement in your optic, and it allows you to see more of the terrain in front of you.
Right. Now, this particular example of the rifle is a Chinese version. This is the NDM, which really, if you didn't look at the markings, you couldn't tell this apart from a Russian-built rifle. Now, there's some speculation out there, as you were saying earlier, there's two camps of people. Some people believe that these Chinese rifles were actually built in Russia, restamped, and then sold or used internally. And then there's another camp that believe that the Chinese got a hold of these, captured them, reverse engineered them, and manufactured them themselves. Can you put any color around that and tell us a little bit more about that?
Well,
where do you lay in that conversation? What do you believe?
Well, I have looked into both camps. I have literally been at ISMASH, who's the manufacturer of SVD Dragunovs, and I've talked to engineers together with Marc Vorobiev about this. And I've heard the Russian engineers say those rifles were produced in Russia and they were sold to the Chinese. I've talked to Chinese engineers, okay, who said that, you know, we captured SVD Dragunovs from the Vietnamese during our border conflicts, and we reverse engineered them and we built them ourselves in the Type 79 and then later the Type 85, which are still today Chinese military issue. To be honest, I know Marco believes that they're Russian rifles. I would not bet my life one way or the other. I simply don't know with the material that, you know, I have today. But it's an interesting, you know, part of this rifle's history.
Yeah, Marco makes a pretty good argument for it being Russian. He was showing me markings on it and stuff. And what I know about Chinese weapons and markings on Chinese weapons, he was almost convincing me that it was actually Russian built. But again, as you said, it's hard to tell, and you get in two stories from two different sides of the discussion. So overall, the weapon is still probably one of the most prolific sniper rifles in the world, even today, even though it was designed in the 1960s. Now, the Russians still use the rifle, correct?
It is still in active duty, and it will remain in active duty with the Russian Federal Army for the foreseeable future. One of the interesting things about the SVD is it didn't evolve like the Kalashnikov. The Kalashnikov remained in Russian service once it was introduced in the late 1940s, early 1950s, but then they weren't quite happy with it. And they evolved in the AK-74. Well, they went from the AK-47 to the AKM. Then they completely changed calibers. They went to the AK-74, and they continued to modernize the design. The SVD, though, has basically stood the test of time. You know, you lost the wooden furniture, and they introduced a shorter side-folding stock version. But the weapon, if you issued it to a Russian soldier, you know, from 1963, it would be exactly what he was familiar with. Now, there have been prototypes made to modernize this design to another level, where they're free-floating the barrel just like we do with our NRA high-power AR-15 match rifles through the use of a float tube. This would also allow them to mount a bipod onto the float tube so that the barrel was completely free-floated and the bipod was not affecting the harmonics of the barrel. And, you know, they have played with other calibers at different times. So I think you will see a modernization of the SVD in the next few years, but I don't think that the basic rifle is going anywhere.
There are some minor changes, mostly cosmetic, that we've seen, like the SVDS that has the tube stock that side folds, and then the rifle has a traditional pistol grip. We've seen the rifle evolve from laminate wood stocks to the new polymer woods and stuff like that. But yeah, we haven't seen any basically functional changes to the rifle.
The biggest change has simply been, you know, the change of rifling, the rifling twist. And they're still using the PSO1 scopes today. And it's interesting. It's a very simple, rugged, reliable rifle. You know, it uses a short stroke piston as opposed to a long stroke like the Kalashnikov does. It has an adjustable gas system for when the rifle is dirty or very fouled from continued hard use. It has a carrier-controlled rotating bolt. feeds from a 10-round detachable box magazine. And it's interesting that the magazine actually took Dragunov over a year to design and perfect due to the rim cartridge.
And what's also interesting is the rifle has iron backup sights built into it that you can see without actually having to remove the scope or anything like that. You just look down, you can see through the sights, or obviously use the optics.
Well, that was actually a big deal, because if you stop and think about it, okay, when this rifle was introduced, optics were still working on the optics, okay, as far as they're not as durable as a modern optic like what we have today, just due to the sealing and different things on them, okay. So there was a feeling that you couldn't really trust your optics, and you always had to be able to, actively have your iron sights in case the optic went down. The other thing, though, was that having your iron sights readily available allows you to actively engage very close targets just by dropping your head and ignoring the optic.
Right.
So you can shoot rapidly up close, or you still have the optic available.
As Marco put it, when he was talking about the use of the rifle in combat, it's a sniper rifle in one role, but then if the threat gets too close, then that sniper can transition to what he calls a gunfighter.
Absolutely.
He can use it like an assault rifle, so it's kind of multifaceted in that respect in its design.
What's interesting is when you talk to Marco about how they would set up ambushes in Afghanistan, you'd have an assault group, and then about, maybe depending upon the terrain, 200 yards behind them, you'd have a support group, and that would have your PKM machine gun, your automatic grenade launchers, and your SVDs, okay? And there would be times that when they were initiating an ambush, it would be his job to go down and take out, say, all the heavy weapon gunners on say, gun trucks. Mm-hmm. And these Toyota gun trucks with 12.7 machine guns on them, he would just go down and knock the gunners off just as quick as he could. And then there were other times when his unit was being assaulted and almost overrun, that he would be a rifleman fighting with everyone else.
Right. And this 7.62 by 54R cartridge, this thing's been around since the 1800s, and it's still very effective.
Well, see, what's interesting about this design is it was developed in 1891. This is only a few years after the French introduced smokeless powder with their famed 8mm Lebel cartridge. So it's one of the first smokeless powder cartridges that came into existence for military use. And yet, after all these other cartridges from its time period have all been eclipsed and fallen into history, it's still going strong. Why? Well, because the Russians are frugal, for one reason, okay, but also because it's still damn good at what it was designed for. I mean, it's a hard-hitting, 311 diameter bullet that reaches out fairly well. And what's interesting about this is I've talked to a number of engineers at Celler & Lapua and in Russia who all built straight competition ammunition in both 308 Winchester and 7.62 by 54R. And this was most noteworthy at Lapua, okay, because they're very well known for their sniper ammunition. And the engineers every single one of them all said the same thing. They all felt that the 54R, due to its design, was a more inherently accurate cartridge. Now, you would only see that in a state-of-the-art competition rifle, but it says a lot for the cartridge design as well.
Yeah, it certainly does. Now, unfortunately, these rifles are no longer available in the U.S. as new rifles. The Russians signed an agreement years ago that they wouldn't import them into the U.S., and of course, Chinese imports have been cut off. These rifles are available in the surplus market, if you can find them out there used, I should say. But the prices of these things are just going up and up and up. I mean, you can pay upwards $5,000 for a good example. The Chinese imported them both in 7.62 by 54R and 308, and this is the 7.62 by 54R version. Well, David, thank you for all your information that you shared with us on this rifle. Man, I wish I knew a tenth of what you know about things like this, but it's good having you here.
A lot of useless information mostly, but it was just a pleasure being here with you.
Thanks. If you guys have any questions about what you saw this afternoon, you can ask those questions on our Facebook page. You can find us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/military arms. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll talk to you guys soon.